Ta-da! We're live, everyone. This is another poly inclusion YouTube video coming at ya, and we've got 4 admins today, including the owner of the page. We're gonna introduce ourselves today. We're talking about an issue we posted on Instagram that is controversial, and we knew that going in, and it got a lot of comments, a lot of heated comments from some folks who have different opinions. But our basic issue question is, does ethical non-monogamy inherently belong under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella? So my name is Mark, and I'm hoping get us the stream on YouTube. I am 34. I am the only male admin at this time, and I'm gay with 2 partners.
I am Alana. I'm the page owner. I made the page over 2 years ago, I think, at this point. I only have one partner who I will live with, who you will not see, but hear him give some opinions, and his name is Terry. And we've been together for 2 years, and he actually is someone who chose to become non-monogamous, yes. And I was someone who feels as if they were born to be non-monogamous.
I'm Miso. I think I've been with the page for a year and a half, could be longer. Don't really know when I joined. I am 21. Yes, I'm 21. I am polysexual. That's and aromantic. Those are my more comfortable labels that I use nowadays. And then I am in Wisconsin, so not the sunshine. I don't know what to say.
Cheese, probably.
The dairy state. Although I'm allergic to cheese, I live in the dairy state.
Interesting.
I'm bisexual, polyamorous, and I live in Scotland, Boston, and I have 2 primary partners.
Oh yeah, I didn't say my partners. Huh. I don't have any partners right now, so that's why.
And I didn't say I'm from Michigan, but I said it yesterday, so that's fine. Yeah.
Eventually, we will get our introduction down, guys.
It's only number 4.
One day. I feel like at some point people will just get so used to seeing all that, so they'll just be like, okay, let's get to the topic. We know you guys. Let's go.
Yeah. So speaking of our big question that I think we're maybe all on the same page about, but does ethical non-monogamy belong under the LGBTQIA umbrella? And if you don't know, LGBTQIA plus stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and questioning, intersex, asexual, aromantic, and then plus could include other things. Generally, all of those, if you think of them, they are sexual identity or expression or gender identity and expression centered. So, Elena, how did we get to this controversial topic, and why is it so controversial?
I honestly feel like this is one of the topics I feel extremely strongly on, and a point that I pointed out before we got started here is that all of us are actually in both communities. So we're actually talking about our views from being in the LGBT plus, and I'm just going to say LGBT plus for time's sake because my mouth will not be able to say all the letters. And then, from us being in this community, from all of us being in the ethical non-monogamous community. And from both standpoints, I know for a fact all 4 of us is just, we can't see the reasoning of wanting them being blended together. And I think it's one of the most important topics to talk about as we, as a community as a whole, try to basically like make a name for ourselves and kind of like get our roots going and, start to stand up for ourselves and, get ourselves out there in the media and things. And I just don't understand personally why so many people want so many different things to be shoved into a label that is already kind of bursting at the seams and already has like a very beautiful community going. And I think it's time just to let other things like non-monogamy or like some counterpoints that people made on the page where things like BDSM or like leather play were in the community of LGBT, which personally, I don't feel like they are. I feel like that's its own community in itself. So I just feel like it's a very important distinction as a community to make, to just kind of draw that line in the sand, because at some point each community needs to be its own thing.
Yeah, I think that we talked about yesterday, where there's like, of course, there's overlap. Like all of us here would be overlapping people who are like, yes, I think all of us are cisgender as well. So if we're all cisgender, but we're all like of different sexual orientations, bisexual, you're pansexual, and gay, like all of us represent very different and interesting parts of the LGBT community. But that, like, our being polyamorous, like, doesn't have anything to do with me being bisexual. Like, even if that was true, every bisexual person I met would be the same as me. You know what I mean? And a lot of, like, I think stereotypes around people who are pan, bi, polysexual, people who have like, multiple, like I say 3 and 4 on the Kinsey scale, people get to be told like, oh, you're just like less satisfied by one partner. And it's like, that's not really true. It's a stereotype. And just saying that, you know that the poly community isn't the same as the queer community. Like, you know that just by how the queer community treats like non-monogamy in general, and how the straight community treats non-monogamy in general. They're very different places. Like when as Mark was saying yesterday, I was agreeing with him, like you have to come out to the gay community when you're poly. You have to come out to the straight community when you're poly. You have to do both. And I think if that doesn't prove enough that it's like a different thing, different community, different philosophy in itself, like, like how do we navigate that, like in the poly community, and say, oh yes, this is totally going to be in this community, because you're right, it's bursting at the seams and it doesn't belong there.
I think another like distinction to make, and like this is me saying this, from like I guess an LGBT, viewpoint of, gender identity and sexuality and like sexual identities, things like that. That is what LGBT has been, what all of these trans women, during the Stonewall riots, what they died for. I just feel very disrespected when people just want so badly to be included, when in reality, you don't have to be included. You can be included in your own thing. You can have your own thing, and that is okay. And it's okay to be, in this community, in that community, in this community, and you're into that and into that. That's totally cool. Not everything has to fit in one community, so it's easier for you to explain yourself to people. You can have multiple things about you. And so when I hear people say things like BDSM or leather play or pet play, or, just like, I just don't understand how sexual acts can be a part of the LGBTQ community, because that's definitely not what people are putting their lives on the line for. It's not so, it's not so you can go home and do those things at home and be with your partner and just, and I'm really trying to be kind of like PG when I talk about this, but in reality, and like, I feel like this was a big standpoint too, when, gay people were really trying to get their rights, especially like in America and stuff, was, what we do in the bedroom is none of your business. So no, you shouldn't be ashamed for like being in BDSM and doing kinks and all that stuff, whatever. I just don't think that those things need to be shoved in the community so you can feel accepted. I think you need to pull your own weight and build your own community and find acceptance from your own community, other than trying to piggyback off the work that a community's already done.
I agree, because it's sort of like kink and BDSM. Yes, you are often like LGBTQ members who do participate in that, but people that are cis and hetero also participate in that as well. And it's like those are ways of expressing your sexuality and your identity, but it's not an identity in of itself. Like it's like I'm black, but I'm not like Haitian. Like I can't those that's not like it's sort of like ethnicity and culture for me. Like I don't the type of black that I am doesn't do what the Haitian does. So I can't be like that's mine or parts of their culture is not mine. Like I don't know if that makes sense. Like it's just you can be an overarching thing and then not necessarily take that subsection. Like you can be LGBTQ and kink may be the way you express it. It's like here's how I meant to explain it. Like I'm black and but I'm not from not African American. Like I don't express myself the same way these people do. And overarchingly, I'm a person of color. I'm not gonna have a quinceanera because that's not part of being a person of color. That's part of being what's the word I'm looking for? Hispanic. Like being LGBTQ doesn't mean you're gonna be part of the kink community, but that is a way of expressing the fact that you are LGBTQ. Did that make sense? It made sense in my head.
Yeah.
It just didn't.
It does make sense, and it's. I think the problem is that sometimes it's hard, especially when you're in some communities that are still really trying to like get like their feet on the ground and they're really trying to get the ball running. It's really hard when you really do have all this miscommunication in the community on whether or not how you feel is something that's I guess valid or not, and it's really hard to think like, wow, so this really does make sense in my head, but how does it not make sense to other people? Like that's when I really am responding to these people on the page who are telling me these things. I don't think they read what they write, because when I read it, it doesn't, I can't wrap my head around it. Like I'm actually reading some of the points that I wrote down.
Too much out of emotion and not out of logic.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's not out of logic.
No, it's not. It really is out of emotion. They kind of get, what is a nice way to say this? They kind of get their panties in a twist.
Yeah, they're up in their own emotions, so they think what they're saying is right, but it's not.
And like someone, on the page when we made this post said, they were trying to point out like BDSM, love and play, polyamory are all under, the LGBT plus umbrella because they're not unrelated. And anybody who's in the poly community knows that one of like the most well-known sayings is polyethical non-monogamy is not about sex. That's like one of the biggest things that we try to push through, that we try to get people to understand, because there are people that, for one, don't want to have sex or just aren't interested in it, or however they may feel about not partaking in that activity, just like how there are people in the LGBT plus community who are the same way, who may be sex repulsed, or they're just not interested, or however they feel about that activity. And I just think people really, just because something is about what you like and what you have doesn't mean it's about what you're doing with those things.
Mm-hmm.
And also, like, to play off of that, like, the kink community in the BDSM community was built for a purpose. It was built so that people who had kinks could, like, participate in a loving and accepting place, just like the poly community was built for people to create love and acceptance amongst each other. And the LGBTQ community was created so people could rise up and, fight against really unfair laws that were oppressing them. All of these communities built up in order to support one another. You know what I mean? And of course, there's going to be overlap, but a big thing that we have to point out is that LGBTQ isn't about sex. It's about people coming together to support one another. Being poly and being in poly communities is about support. And then being in a kink and BDSM community is about support of that thing. And you can be cis and hetero in that community. You can be cis and hetero in the poly community, but you are not cis and hetero in the LGBT community. And like, right. These are just parts, like these are things that can overlap. There's a Venn diagram that's gorgeous, and you can be a trans person who goes to a kink party and have a hell of a time. You can be a trans person in a poly relationship with someone who's hetero and cis, but they can't be LGBTQ and do all of that with you in that community. Like there's definitely a trickle down and overlap, but like I have plenty of partners that are cis hetero men in poly relationships with me. And I've had partners who are bisexual cis men who are in relationships with me and in the kink community. But like it flows, but it's not the same.
I also think you bring up a good point. Just because things are related to each other doesn't mean that they are they fit under one broad topic. Because I was thinking about it, and it's like, for me, I'm a minority in basically every way. Like, I'm a woman, I'm a person of color, I'm in the LGBT community, I'm poly. Like, so all those things are identities that I belong to, but not, and they all may seem related to one each other, but they're not all they're all minorities. That's a broad, but other than that, they're all different. And it also sort of brings into the point where like, Indians, Indians from India. Oh wow, words. I can't do words. Indians from India, like a lot of them may be Hindus, but they're not all Hindus. It's a related, like it's related, but they're not one thing. You can't be like all Indians are Hindus, just like you can't be like all LGBTQ is poly. Like just because things are related to one another doesn't mean that they're all like, not all Hindus are Indian either. Like we inherently think about, when you think about it, the person that a Hindu person, the thing that comes to your mind predominantly is an Indian person or someone from that region. But there are people all over the world who practice Hindu, just like there are people all over the world who are poly. And when you think about poly, most often you do think about an LGBTQ couple, but there are heterosexual couples that their polyship is completely hetero, like female to male relationship. That's all that exists, or male, whatever. Like they just have a hetero relationship that exists in the poly relationship structure. But yes, when we do often think about poly, like in the media that's shown, it's like a closed triad where it is usually there is an element of LGBTQ there. That's not necessarily the case though. Like just because two things are often conjoined, doesn't mean they're the same thing.
Yeah, and I think I'm like in between when one of us is talking, meeting the rest of us, so there's not bleed, but I'm trying to pay attention to who's getting ready to talk, just if you see that. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in some of the posters, at least, about what the LGBTQ community is, or LGBTQIA, what that community is. And there can be some like the idea that it's just an inclusive group, and we just include all minorities, sexual minorities, or social minorities and outcasts, people who feel like they're on the outside, isn't what the LGBTQIA community has stood for. It could, if we all decided that that's what we wanted it to be, but it's really been about sexual and gender identity and expression. And like I was saying at the beginning, if you look at every letter that's included, even with the plus that could include others, but they all relate to sexual or gender identity and expression. They don't have, you're not part of the group just because people in society, you're outside of the societal norm and people don't like what you're doing. And that's unfortunate, but I'm part of both. So when I came out in the LGBTQIA community, people didn't ask me if I was poly or non-monogamous, because they're different things. When I had to come out twice, like we talked about yesterday, I got to come out twice and tell people. They didn't just assume, because it's not really part of the community. If everyone wanted it to be, it could, but that's not what it's been about. Ethical non-monogamy, in my mind, is about how and how many people you love. And the LGBTQIA community, one note I wrote, is about who you love and who you are. So it may not be about sex. Either of them may not be about who you have sex with, but it's LGBTQIA. Those letters are about who I am and who I'm attracted to. And ethical non-monogamy is like how I choose to love, or how I feel like I'm supposed to love. If you feel like it's an orientation, how I love and how many people I love, like relationship styles, like we've talked about in a different video, rather than sexual and gender identity. So that I think there's, for some folks, there's just this fundamental misunderstanding about what the LGBTQIA community is. If we want to add things that don't fit in, everyone could do that, but as it stands, that's just not what is part of it, hasn't been part of it, and what is part of it at this point.
I think it's also good to mention that some of the arguments that they're making is some of the very arguments that pedophile community, I don't know what they're called, MAPS, I think, that they're making to show that they belong to the LGBT community, because they're like, oh, it's related to my sexual identity, and it's like, no, everybody, I'm hoping everybody has agreed that pedophiles do not belong in the LGBT community. But because like some of the arguments that people have been making lately, it's like you guys are making the same arguments that the pedophiles are making. So if we say, yeah, your argument is valid, how can we then say no to the pedophiles, because they have the exact same argument? So why can we discriminate? Like, I'm hoping everyone agrees that why can we exclude the pedophiles but include poly when they have the exact same arguments? Like, why can you discriminate against one but not the other? Also, unlimited love does not define who you spread that love to. Poly is you have an unlimited love and attraction to people, and LGBTQ is defining who you spread that love to. So, those things.
Kind of like to piggyback off what she said, because you and Mark honestly both just take the words out of my mouth all the time. That's why I love you guys. And like my thing is I made this comment before we got started too, and this will probably be a controversial comment, but it's something I stand by. People are afraid to go against anything that someone from the LGBT plus community says. And I know that because I'm a part of that community. You know, there are so many people who are afraid to say, you know, the feelings that you are experiencing are not normal. And I'm not like trying to say that like people who are finding terms for these valid experiences and feelings are invalid. I'm really talking about the people who, like how Mark said, for the sake of just, you know, you're a minority in a community, you know, you're a minority community, and you just want that, you just want that acceptance. I'm gonna have to like backtrack to what I said before. You know, you have to do the work in your own community. You just can't, you know, you can take inspiration and hope for the same goals as your community, as one that has already kind of hit those goals, like the LGBT plus community, but you can't just shove yourself in there. And you know, and that can be applied for so many things, especially like, you know, how people, like when Nisa said how people are trying to say, like, I don't even really want to say the MAP community, because they're not a community. It's a group of criminals trying to justify the acts that they're doing. And you can't just keep making room for people because boo-hoo, you know, we're not mainstream, boo-hoo, you know, we're not getting all these rights. It's like, yeah, and neither is the rest of the world, but we've done our work, you know. And it's like, for me personally, I want to do the work for my own community. I really don't just want things to keep getting shoved in to this label, to this LGBTQ community, just to make things easier to accept, because people are too scared to say, no, that's not LGBT. At some point, we have to decide, you know, what is LGBT? Are we going to keep adding things that truly just don't have anything to do with this existing community that's already, you know, been established? Like the other, I think it was last week, I was, you know, having a conversation with somebody, you know, through our page, talking about a label I've kind of been seeing rear its head around online. I don't know if y'all have been seeing it, but it's called Amboris or Ambioris or something like that. And it's basically, you know, a rebranded sexuality of polymonoflux or monogamish. And it was basically describing having the ability to maintain polyamorous or, monogamous relationships, and being able to, do this and then make a conscious decision to be, okay, no, I want to do this now. And my thing is how are you comfortable with basically kind of like stripping a term from a community that already exists, already has an established history, and I even sent them Google Analytics of the millions and millions of searches for things like monogamish or polymonoflux versus the 100, maybe 50 searches within the last year of this so-called sexuality. It's like at some point, you're just not doing your research. Yes, sometimes new terms need to be found, not really created because something was already there. We just didn't have the language for it. But sometimes maybe you just need to do more research and find that there is already a community here for you to welcome you with open arms.
People who know me know that I've struggled with certain terms in the LGBTQ plus spectrum. There are some things that I'm just like, we already have a term for that. Why are we using this new term? Like, what is the difference? And people are very insistent that there is a difference, and then I get confused, and because I don't want to invalidate someone else's identity, I'm kind of just like, okay, I don't understand the difference, but you are very insistent upon there being this difference in it. That's kind of just like, I don't want to, also because I'm like, I just don't know enough. But when it comes to polyamory, again, fundamentally, it's about you having the ability to love many, not how you love or who you love or who you are. That is the fundamental difference for me. But because also, if you just look, the history of both communities is just so different in going forward and how they are accepted in the world and why they've become minorities. So I just can't see how people why are we doing this really? Because it makes you feel unique, because you need to feel part of the LGBT community, or maybe it's just because we're so used to everything being minority, when it comes to sexuality and love being immediately a part of the LGBTQ, and that's the only discussion we have when it comes to differences about sexuality and romantic attraction, that people automatically just anything that has to do with sex and how people romance is automatically part of the LGBTQ, and it's kind of honestly no.
Yeah, there's definitely differences. We have one of the questions that I had that I didn't ask because it's a little bit more intense than I wanted to be, but if I'm willing to change my mind on the topic if there is someone who can actually show me, it doesn't seem like some of the folks who have opinions that ethical non-monogamy should be part of the LGBTQ umbrella. It seems like there's just not a full understanding of the history, and we can't go into the full history of both LGBTQIA and ethical non-monogamy. But if someone can show me the Harvey Milks and Matthew Shepards of the ethical non-monogamous community, the Marsha P. Johnsons and Sylvia Rivera's, if you can show me where people, because of the number of people they love, are beaten and killed in the streets or have to riot and have protests to be ethical non-monogamous, which may be, and if someone can give me those resources, that would be great. But that's for me, in my mind, that's a very clear difference between the two. There are places where people probably have been killed for being polygamous or polygynous, but specifically, that for me is the difference between the two. Of if you can show me the folks who have fought in that way with their lives to be ethically non-monogamous, the same way that the LGBT, I haven't, but I've been shouted at from car windows, the F word that I don't want to say on YouTube, and bullied for being part of the LGBT community. Even before I was out, if the experience is the same, I would love for that to be shown to me, because I am both part of both communities. So I don't have anything against the ethical non-monogamy community. It just isn't. It isn't the same, and it feels a little bit, which is maybe a mean thing to say, but it a little bit feels like the ENM community jumping onto and into something that they didn't have to help build and they didn't have to fight for with their lives, which would be part of the way, like I think, Elena, you had said on a comment, or me, so somebody had said that it feels disrespectful to our community, where I haven't fought with my life. I haven't been physically beaten, but I have brothers and sisters in the community who have.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's also kind of like, my God, sorry, have to get my train of thought back together. LGBT, like, I personally, from the few times that I can bring up being poly really easier than I can bring up being like my sexuality. Just realized. So like when I do bring up that I'm poly, or like I'm in multiple relationships, like the reactions, like how do you manage that? Usually they're like curiosity, wanting to learn more, or being like, oh, you'll grow out of. Like my mom was like, okay, fine, that's fine. You'll grow out of it when you meet someone you want to settle down with. You'll be fine. But like even the bare hint of like LGBTQ, and they're all my parents are immediately like, no, none of our children could ever be that. Like if I do come out to them, I'm pretty sure like they would find the nearest conversion therapy, and I would be put in that. Like it's just mind-boggling to them that someone could be LGBTQ without having a traumatic childhood or something like that. But poly, they're like, oh, that's fine. You'll just find someone one day and settle. Like they're like, you'll just grow out of it. Like it's a teenage thing. Like most people besides them is just like they're curious about poly and how you make it work, or like how you deal with things. And then with LGBTQ, they're like, don't bring that up, or like very much against it. Like, so that difference in reactions, like I just find that most people have like they equate it to cheating, and they're like, oh, how like people, I don't want to generalize, but from my experience, a lot of people are more okay with like poly because they're like, oh, it's sort of like cheating, or they have problems with that cheating, but they can accept that. They're like, it's wrong, but I can accept it. LGBTQ, they're like, it's wrong and I can't accept that. Like, it's wrong in a way I just can't accept. They're like, cheating, you're betraying trust or whatnot, but like, I can accept it because it's not my relationship.
I feel like the big difference is ethics. Like, in a lot of ways, like we're discussing how it's kind of unethical for people to jump on the bandwagon and the work that the LGBT community has done for their community, and how it's unethical for people to do that. And creating the poly community has been a constant battle of defending its ethics as ethical non-monogamy. And I think that's a big part of like this community, of being like, when we say to other people like, hey, this is something I care about, or something I feel I was like born as, like Alana said, like she's like, I was born to be polyamorous. Like I don't feel that way. I feel like polyamory is more of a choice and a philosophy, although I do know that I would never practice monogamy. So, but I feel like that overlap is something we can have. Like here in the poly community, you can choose to be poly, or you can feel like it was born inside of you and that's something you need to do to be happy. Like either way, it's valid here. But if you're LGBTQ, that's not something we say is a choice. It's who you are. And I think that's a huge distinguisher, is like that, like ethics about it.
That is one of the main reasons, sorry, that I tell people that it is disrespectful when you say that they are the same thing, because, for some people, like my boyfriend Terry, it was a choice. He chose to join me in an ethically non-monogamous relationship, and at first he didn't really partake in anything, non-monogamous wise, until he one day asked me. He said, am I allowed to do the same things that you are? And I said, well, that's the whole point. Why wouldn't you be? So it took him about a year, I guess, really to get the courage to ask me, am I allowed to do the same things? And I really hadn't have been with anybody else since me and him have been together. I think I've only seen maybe one or two people, just hung out for a while. And for him, he didn't even know that there was that ethical choice, because he has had problems with people cheating on him before. And like for me, I didn't even know, because I'm from Virginia. I'm on the Bible Belt, so there's a lot of things that kids don't know. But I didn't even know that monogamy was a thing, and I didn't even know that there was an opposite to monogamy. And I think another thing people don't realize is that we have our own like issues in the community of, I guess, educating people and showing them that there are different kinds of ways, and that the only way you can be in our community if you're doing it the ethical way, because there is monogamy, and that's the mainstream, like being straight and cishet, as some people call it. So you have this mainstream of monogamy, and then you have kind of like the opposite, which is cheating, which is non-monogamy. And then you have our community, which is, I don't really think solution is the right word, but it's its own community of these people who have chose not to be unethically non-monogamous. They've chosen to be honest and create these bonds and create this community and come together and tell people, like, this is something that we want to do. This is something we're all okay with. So why can't we have our space to do that? Does that make sense? Did I trail off a little bit there?
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think the distinguisher I would make is I wouldn't say I would just say it's a different type of relationship structure, because it assumes that you can't like cheat if you're in a polyamorous relationship, because you can.
Well, see, but the thing is you can, but then it wouldn't be a polyamorous relationship. It would be unethical non-monogamy. Like, yes, you're still, you still have that relationship dynamic, but if it's not ethical, then your relationship at that point in time isn't falling under that umbrella. I really feel like when you say you're ethically non-monogamous, I really kind of feel like it's almost like a status, if that makes sense, of your relationship, like where you are in that current time. And I'm not saying that, like, if someone cheats on you, you can't get over that, you can't ever get back together or date them or whatever. I'm just saying, like yes, of course, in the poly community, of course you can cheat, but I wouldn't even consider that non-monogamy because they did cheat. Does that make sense?
No, I think you're confusing things. Like, people who are monogamous, if they cheat, they're still monogamous. They're still in a monogamous relationship. They're just not following the rules properly. And if you cheat and you're in a poly relationship and you go, I didn't know I was crossing that boundary, but I've hurt your feelings with your partner, and your partner goes, that is cheating to me, and you go, oh, okay, and then you have to restructure everything. Like, this happens in polyamorous relationships, and I think it's not good for us to say, oh, as soon as you cheat in a poly relationship, you're bad. Like, that's like people who are monogamous saying, like, you can never be in a monogamous relationship again because you cheated. Like, that's stupid. Like, why would you do that? That's like someone who's bisexual who dates a lot of men just because it's hard to date women. You can't be LGBTQ because you only date men. Like, that's silly. We're creating boundaries that don't need to exist.
That is,
yeah,
surprisingly, because like I said, I identify as polysexual, but most of my relationships have been with cis men. So most people are like, how are you saying you're LGBTQ? And it's like, I am attracted to other people. It's just the places I've lived, it's kind of hard to find other LGBTQ people that I'm attracted to and want to be in a relationship with, because like I said, I'm also aromantic. So like finding that person where I'm like, I can be in a relationship with you and you won't like be hurt by it because I'm not gonna be in this sort of relationship is much harder than like cis men tend to be okay with me being aromantic more than like other women or whatnot. So it's also just like when it comes to this, it's when it's when you're ethically non-monogamous, you define how you want your relationship to be. You define what cheating is, where the boundaries are more clearly than because you have to actually talk about it and be like, this is what how we're going to open relationships up, how we want our relationship structured, how you're going to be spending time. Whereas in monogamy, it's kind of like this is the default of how your relationship is going to be. And yes, people do put in the work to define their monogamous relationships and define their boundaries, but there's sort of like a default that you work off of when you are monogamous. And it's kind of like emotional cheating is such a harder thing for people in monogamous relationships to see as cheating until they've like experienced it themselves. Because I've had friends who I'm like, you should break up with this person. They're emotionally cheating on you. And they're like, they didn't sleep or step out. And I'm like, to me, that look, they are emotionally cheating on you. And it's kind of like, why are you with this person when they're emotionally not within your bounds of the relationship that you've told me is what you've defined it as? And it's like as a poly person, I'm like, yeah, your boundaries have been crossed. Maybe not physically, because for a lot of monogamous people, like unless they have physically cheated and had an affair or something like that, it's a lot harder for them to see that as cheating. Whereas like for me, I'm like, they are definitely emotionally cheating on you. Like based on what you've told me as this is our relationship boundaries, they have violated those boundaries. Why are you still in this relationship, or why have you not talked about it? And it's like, oh, it's forgiven. It's just friends or whatnot.
Yeah.
I think another big difference between the communities is, you know, when you're LGBT, when you have, you know, your sexuality or your gender identity that falls under this label, after you kind of, I guess, do the work and like figure these things out and come out and, you do that emotional labor to be comfortable with yourself. And I'm not saying that there's not any work included in that, but I feel like it's a lot more work, because it is a lot more work to maintain a healthy, ethically non-monogamous relationship. And I just feel like, after you kind of have come out, like in the sense of the things that you have to do personally for you to kind of be like, okay, yes, I'm gay, or yes, I'm bi, and and like you kind of choose how you want to live, and how you choose, how am I going to do this, how am I going to come out to people, when you're ethically non-monogamous, whether you're dating 2 people or 6 people, or you're dating 2 people one day and then you're single the next, you're always doing the work of these relationships agreements, to avoid these miscommunications where it could come off as cheating. And you're always doing the work of, okay, I'm going to see Susie this day and John this day, and I got to take, you have all these things you have to think about, and all these things you have to do sort of to kind of keep this life balance. And it really does, like, I know some people say like being gay is a lifestyle, and there definitely is like that very, like hyper queer lifestyle. But I really do feel like when you're non-monogamous, like your life really changes. And I honestly think for the better, because you have these people in your life, and sometimes they have kids and you get to see them and you get to spend time with them, and your life kind of gets more exciting by 2 or 3 times, because now you have all these different people in your life.
Yeah, I think that some of the other stuff that we've seen on the comments are regarding, and then you guys can help talk about these. The idea that there's similarities between the two groups, which there definitely are. Like there's similarities in that both groups have a coming out experience of some sort, and we talked about that yesterday. You decide what that is. If you tell everyone, if you tell no one, if you only tell your partners, or whatever that is for you. you can be both LGBTQIA and ethically non-monogamous. So there's overlap and similarity there. You might have social or rejection with your family or with your friends, and it can be different. Like you can, I don't know anyone personally who's been fired because they're non-monogamous. I do know a couple of people who've lost their jobs because they're LGBT and came out at work. So like there are some similarities. There may be others that we can say, but it seems like that's a confusing point where this group BDSM and kink or the ethically non-monogamous folks should be part of LGBT because there's some things that are similar, but I know that we've definitely discussed the things that are dissimilar, just like to acknowledge that yes, there are things that are similar, and that may be a cause of confusion for some folks, but just because it's similar doesn't mean that it's all under one umbrella. There are just as many differences as there are similarities, and reasons that I think and that we've said that we think that it doesn't belong under that umbrella. Still a valid thing. We're all both of the things, but
Also, my thing is also how LGBT affects your social status throughout history versus how non-monogamy affects your social status throughout history. Because throughout history, the upper class has it's kind of just been a non-questionable thing that they're non-monogamous. Like we can talk about the misogyny of that at some point and how some points just but there is just a point like it's kind of like as long as you're discreet about it you can be non-monogamous in social but like being upper class and being LGBTQ has been like a death uh like basically like just unacceptable but like it's just for me the big thing is ethical non-monogamy has been discreetly acceptable as long as you're discreet about it it's fine but LGBTQ if there's even like a whiff of it there's a lot of persecution that comes with that like it's just based on how the sorry acceptance levels have just flown through history like people have been okay with non-monogamy for basically all our time until like there have been periods of religion where has influenced it to be more like you have to be supremely discreet and it's not but otherwise it's always been more accepted than LGBTQ is.
I think, like I guess a good final point for me, to kind of, go back to what Mark was saying is, see, that was right on the tip of my tongue. You go back like to what Mark was saying about how, people like, these things are discriminated against, right? And they just kind of want this thing to be they want something like polyamory to be LGBT because they've had similar experiences with coming out or, not really being accepted by mainstream society. And another thing that people were pointing, I guess we're trying to make their case when I was, talking to them on the page was, things like BDSM and leather play and stuff are intertwined in the community because they're practiced by people in the community. And those people who practice those things stood up for the rights for those things alongside of gay people. But my thing is when we're talking about the Stonewall riots and stuff, we're not talking about the people who are there for their right to die, to wear leather during sex or to use leather during sex. We're not talking about the things that you do with your partners when we're talking about these people. We're talking about people who really gave up more than you'll probably ever have to have this acceptance for this community and to have this community, kind of become this safe haven for these people. And for you just to want to blend things in this community because they kind of go through the same things or you have to come out kind of similar to being LGBT, it still, frankly, to me doesn't make sense because you can come out as being a Christian, you can come out as being a Wiccan, you can, come out, you can really use this come out term for anything that has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. And that's what people will say, like, why are you even bringing up religion or things like that, coming out like that? But the thing is that's what you're doing. Like, yes, some people in their society have to come out as being non-monogamous because it's just something that isn't mainstream. But just because two similar acts take place doesn't mean it's the same thing. Like a quinceañera or bar mitzvah, thank you. Just because those are two coming of age parties doesn't mean that they're the same thing. Is that? I know. So is that a good analogy? He's Jewish, so I was trying to include him a little bit.
They also use a debutante ball.
Oh, yes. I don't understand why people it has to be this thing so badly. And I don't understand why something having its own community is such a horrible thing.
Yeah.
Well, we should probably wrap up, but definitely hope that maybe we could heal some like links and similarities in our communities, but also, that there are separate places for separate growth, for support, and different issues.
Subject that I'll be talking about again, because it's definitely one of the no, it's definitely something I'm very passionate about personally from both perspectives of the community. But I think for today, we've definitely got a good standing ground of why we feel the way that we feel and why a lot of people in the community agree with us.
So just to wrap up, really, if you guys have agree with our points, if you have things you want us to clarify, reach out to us on Instagram, Poly Inclusion. You can reach out to us personally through our DMs. We have our personal accounts listed in the bio. Reach out to us in the comments below. If you guys disagree, do the same thing. Reach out to us, like, about what you disagree with. Comment, Instagram, DMs. If you can find us on Twitter, reach out. Don't reach out to me on Facebook because you're not going to find me on Facebook. And then in the future, we might have people like have a debate, people who don't agree with us, who disagree with us on here, and have a real like lifetime debate about that's what I'm looking for. Live debate about everything on here. But for now, that was our debate on, well, not really a debate, our discussion on whether or not LGBTQIA plus and ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy belong in the same community. Thank you for watching. I'm Miso.
Are we doing thumbs? Oh, I'm Mark.
That's how none of us are. Just the awkward peace sign and thumbs up.
Your name.
Mark. My name is Mark.
Elena.
I'm so glad we got to Alana.
Or Alan. Or Elena. I like to say it different ways.
Okay. So that's us, and we are your local poly inclusion page. Have a good day or night or wherever you are, and thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, and all that fun things that YouTube lets you do. Bye, everyone.
Bye.